December 11th, 1941. Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag, his voice echoing through the Kroll Opera House as he declared war on the United States of America. 4 days earlier, Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, Hitler seized the moment to formalize what he believed was inevitable. He spoke of American weakness, of a mongrel nation incapable of military greatness, of a president who had forced Germany's hand. What he did not say, what he could not yet fully grasp, was that he had just made the single most catastrophic strategic decision of his life. The American army, he dismissed that day, numbered roughly 1,600,000 men. Within 4 years, it would exceed 8 million. This is the story of how Hitler learned that truth and what he said as the reality of American power slowly, inexorably crushed every assumption he had built his war upon. Hitler's view of America had calcified long before 1941. He saw a nation weakened by racial mixing, corrupted by Jewish influence, softened by democracy and capitalism. In his table talks, recorded by his adjutants throughout the war, he returned again and again to the same themes. America had no warrior tradition, he insisted. Its people were too comfortable, too divided, too individualistic to fight a modern war. Its military was a joke, its equipment obsolete, its leadership incompetent. This wasn't mere rhetoric. Hitler genuinely believed it. So did many in his inner circle. They looked at America's tiny pre-war army, its isolationist politics, its Depression-era struggles, and saw confirmation of their theories. When the Selective Service Act passed in September 1940, requiring the first peacetime draft in American history, German intelligence noted it with mild interest but little concern. Conscription was one thing. Creating an actual fighting force was another. The Germans had been doing this for generations. What could Americans possibly know about building an army? The first intelligence reports about American mobilization began reaching Berlin in early 1941. Fremde Heere West, the Wehrmacht intelligence section responsible for monitoring the Western Allies, compiled assessments of American military production and troop strength. The numbers were growing, certainly. By spring, American forces had expanded to nearly 1,400,000. New training camps were sprouting across the country. Production of tanks, aircraft, and ships was accelerating. But the reports also noted problems. Training was rudimentary. Equipment was a hodgepodge of obsolete and experimental designs. Officer corps was thin, inexperienced. Logistics were chaotic. The assessments concluded that while America might eventually field a large force, it would take years to become combat effective. Years Germany would not give them. Hitler read these reports with satisfaction. They confirmed what he already knew. In a conference with his generals in July 1941, he dismissed concerns about American intervention. The Americans, he said, are not a military people. They have no tradition of discipline, no understanding of sacrifice. Their soldiers are workers and shopkeepers playing at war. By the time they are ready, if they ever are, the war will be over. Then came December 7th. Pearl Harbor changed everything, but not in the way Hitler expected. He saw Japan's attack as an opportunity, not a warning. Now America would be divided, fighting a two-ocean war, its limited resources stretched impossibly thin. 4 days later, standing before the Reichstag, he made it official. Germany and the United States were at war. His speech that day dripped with contempt. He blamed Roosevelt for warmongering, for violating neutrality, for forcing Germany's hand. He mocked American military capabilities. "We know the power of our own armies," he declared. "We have seen what our soldiers can achieve. We do not fear the entry of any nation into this conflict, least of all one so unprepared for modern warfare." The Reichstag erupted in applause. The newspapers celebrated. The newsreels showed German soldiers laughing at the news. America, they said, would learn what war truly meant. But in Washington, something was already happening that would transform Hitler's declaration from triumph to epitaph. On December 15th, just 4 days after Hitler's speech, President Roosevelt met with his military chiefs. The discussion was blunt. How large an army could America field? How quickly could it be trained, equipped, and deployed? The answer staggered even Roosevelt. Given full mobilization, total industrial commitment, and the draft expansion already underway, America could field an army of 8 million men. Not eventually. Not theoretically. Within 3 years. And that was just the Army. The Navy, Marines, and Army Air Forces would add millions more. The machinery of American mobilization, already in motion before Pearl Harbor, now shifted into a gear no nation had ever attempted. Across the country, training camps that had been built for thousands expanded to hold tens of thousands. Factories that had been cautiously ramping up production threw caution aside and ran triple shifts. Draft boards that had been carefully selecting men now processed them in waves. The trickle became a flood. By January 1942, the first intelligence reports about American mobilization goals began reaching Berlin. Fremde Heere West analysts studied them skeptically. American newspapers were reporting plans for an army of 5 million, perhaps 6 million men. Obvious propaganda, the analysts concluded. Wishful thinking. America lacked the industrial capacity, the training infrastructure, the military tradition to accomplish such a thing. Their assessment estimated that America might, with great effort, field 3 million men by 1944. And those men would be poorly trained, inadequately equipped, led by officers learning on the job. Hitler read the assessment and agreed. He had more immediate concerns anyway. The Eastern Front was consuming everything. Operation Barbarossa, which was supposed to have crushed the Soviet Union by winter, had stalled outside Moscow. The Wehrmacht was bleeding in the Russian cold. American mobilization, however large it might theoretically become, was years away from mattering. The war would be decided in the East, long before the first American divisions arrived in Europe. But the numbers kept growing. By spring 1942, American forces exceeded 2 million. By summer, 2,500,000. The reports from Fremde Heere West grew more detailed, more concerned. American production was exceeding all projections. Shipyards were launching Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. Aircraft factories were producing bombers and fighters in quantities that seemed impossible. Tank production was accelerating beyond anything Germany could match. And still, the men kept coming. Every month, another 100,000 inducted, another 200,000. The training camps couldn't hold them all. New camps were built in weeks. The expansion was chaotic, yes, but it was also relentless. America was doing something no nation had attempted, transforming itself from a peacetime economy to a war machine while simultaneously building an army from scratch. In August 1942, Hitler received a comprehensive intelligence assessment of American military strength. The numbers were stark. Current strength, 3 million men. Projected strength by end of year, 4 million. Projected strength by end of 1943, 6 to 7 million. The assessment noted that while quality remained questionable, the sheer scale of mobilization was unprecedented. America was not just building an army, it was building several armies, each larger than Germany's entire pre-war force. Hitler's reaction was documented by Albert Speer, his armaments minister, who was present at the briefing. Hitler studied the numbers in silence. Then he pushed the report aside. "Quantity is not quality," he said. "The Americans can train 1 million men or 10 million men. It makes no difference if they cannot fight. We have seen what happens when inexperienced troops meet veterans. In France, in Poland, in Russia. Numbers mean nothing without the will to use them." But his voice, Speer later recalled, lacked its usual certainty. For the first time, Hitler seemed to be trying to convince himself. The first test came in November 1942. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, put American troops into combat for the first time. The results were mixed. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces under Rommel bloodied the inexperienced Americans badly. 2,000 casualties, 100 tanks lost, positions overrun. The German newspapers crowed about American weakness. Hitler seized on the battle as proof of his assessment. "You see," he told his generals, "they cannot fight, they break under pressure, all their production, all their numbers, and they run when they meet real soldiers." But Rommel, commanding the forces that had won at Kasserine, sent a different assessment to Berlin. Yes, the Americans had fought poorly, but they had also learned quickly. Within weeks, they had adjusted their tactics, improved their coordination, hardened their discipline, and behind them, an endless stream of replacements and equipment. Rommel's forces, by contrast, were exhausted, undersupplied, cut off. He could win battles, he warned, but the Americans could afford to lose them. Germany could not. Hitler dismissed Rommel's concerns as defeatism, but the intelligence reports kept coming, and the numbers kept growing. By spring 1943, American forces exceeded 5 million men. By summer, 6 million. The projections that had seemed like propaganda 18 months earlier were becoming reality. And these were not just numbers on paper. These were trained divisions, equipped with the latest weapons, backed by industrial production that dwarfed Germany's capacity. In July 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. In September, mainland Italy. Each operation involved more American troops, better coordinated, more effective. The Germans fought them hard, made them pay for every mile, but the Americans kept coming, kept learning, kept improving, and behind them, always, more divisions, more tanks, more planes, more ships, more everything. Hitler's table talks from this period, recorded by Martin Bormann and others, show a man struggling with cognitive dissonance. He still spoke of American weakness, of their lack of fighting spirit, of their dependence on material superiority. But he also began to speak of American production with something approaching awe. "They have turned their entire nation into a factory," he said in October 1943. "Every factory, every worker, every resource directed toward one goal. It is, in its way, impressive, misguided, serving the wrong cause, but impressive." What he did not say, what he could not bring himself to acknowledge, was that this impressive production was attached to an army that now numbered 7 million men. And that army was no longer the inexperienced force that had stumbled at Kasserine. It had been tested in North Africa, in Sicily, in Italy. It had learned. It had adapted. It had become dangerous. The final intelligence assessment came in December 1943, exactly 2 years after Hitler's declaration of war. Fremde Heere West compiled everything they knew about American military strength. The report was devastating. Current strength, 7,500,000 men. Projected peak strength, 8 million or more. 25 divisions in Europe or en route. 50 more in training or reserve. Production capacity exceeding combined Axis output in every category. Logistics network capable of supplying forces anywhere in the world. Air superiority over Western Europe. Naval supremacy in both oceans. The assessment concluded with a sentence that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The United States has successfully mobilized the largest, best-equipped military force in human history. German victory is no longer possible through military means alone. Hitler read the report in his headquarters at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Several witnesses recorded the scene. He was silent for a long time, studying the numbers, the projections, the maps showing American divisions deploying across Britain in preparation for the invasion everyone knew was coming. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. 8 million men, he said. They have built an army of 8 million men. In 3 years. From nothing. He looked up at his generals. I did not believe they could do it. I did not believe they had the will, the discipline, the capacity. I was wrong. It was the closest Hitler ever came to admitting his declaration of war on America had been a catastrophic mistake. But even then, he could not fully accept the implications. He immediately began talking about secret weapons, about jet aircraft and V-rockets, about political divisions in the Allied coalition. Anything to avoid confronting the central truth. He had awakened a giant, and that giant was now coming for him with a force beyond anything he had imagined possible. June 6, 1944. Operation Overlord. 156,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Within a month, 1 million men were ashore. By the end of summer, 2 million. The American army that Hitler had dismissed as impossible was now tearing through France, liberating towns and cities at a pace that stunned even Allied planners. Hitler's response was to deny reality. He ordered his generals to hold every position, to counterattack, to push the Americans back into the sea. He spoke of final victory, of turning the tide, of secret weapons that would change everything. But in private moments, witnessed by his secretaries and adjutants, he returned again and again to the same question. How had they done it? How had the Americans built such a force so quickly? The answer was simple, though Hitler never fully grasped it. America had done what he claimed was impossible. It had transformed its entire society for war while maintaining democratic institutions. It had mobilized its industry without destroying its economy. It had drafted millions while keeping civilian morale high. It had built an army that combined mass with quality, quantity with effectiveness. It had done everything Hitler said could not be done, and it had done it faster and more thoroughly than anyone thought possible. By April 1945, American forces had crossed the Rhine and were driving into the heart of Germany. The army that had numbered 1,600,000 when Hitler declared war now exceeded 8 million men. Behind them, 12 million more Americans in uniform across all services. The industrial power Hitler had dismissed was producing 40% of all military equipment used by Allied forces worldwide. The mongrel nation he had mocked was crushing the Wehrmacht under the weight of men, material, and determination. In the Führerbunker in Berlin, as Soviet shells fell above and American forces closed from the west, Hitler spent his final days raging against betrayal, against weakness, against fate. He blamed his generals, his allies, the German people themselves. But he never again spoke of American military weakness. That particular delusion had died somewhere between Normandy and the Rhine, crushed under the treads of Sherman tanks and the boots of 8 million men he had not believed could exist. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. 8 days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war he had started with such confidence, the war he had expanded by declaring on America with such contempt, was over. The Third Reich, which was supposed to last 1,000 years, had lasted 12, and the army of 8 million men he had dismissed as impossible stood victorious across Europe, having helped destroy the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. In 1939, the United States Army ranked 19th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. By 1945, it was the most powerful military force in human history. Germany, by contrast, began the war with the world's most feared army and ended it with that army shattered, its cities in ruins, its nation occupied and divided. Hitler's declaration of war on America was not simply a strategic mistake. It was a fundamental failure of understanding. He had built his entire world view on assumptions about racial superiority, about the weakness of democracies, about the impossibility of certain kinds of social and industrial organization. America's mobilization disproved every one of those assumptions. A diverse, democratic, capitalist nation had accomplished what Hitler insisted only a racially pure, authoritarian, militarized state could achieve. And it had done so faster, more efficiently, and more thoroughly than Germany ever managed. The 8 million men were not just soldiers. They were a refutation. Every one of them was proof that Hitler's theories were wrong, his assumptions false, his certainty misplaced. He had looked at America and seen weakness. America had looked back and shown him strength beyond his comprehension. In the end, what Hitler said when he learned about America's army of 8 million men mattered less than what he could not bring himself to say. That he had been wrong from the beginning, that his contempt had blinded him to reality, that his declaration of war had sealed his fate. The words he spoke were defiant, dismissive, delusional. The words he did not speak were the only ones that mattered. I miscalculated. I did not understand. I've destroyed everything. Those unspoken words echo louder than any speech he gave, any order he issued, any claim he made. They are written in the ruins of German cities, in the graves of millions, in the final desperate months of a regime that had awakened a giant and paid the ultimate price for that awakening. Hitler learned what America was building. He learned it in intelligence reports, in battle casualties, in the steady advance of armies he had claimed could never exist. He learned it too late, and he learned it in the worst way possible, through defeat so total and absolute that nothing of his vision survived. The 8 million men came. They fought. They won. And in winning, they proved that everything Hitler believed about strength, about power, about the nature of nations and peoples was nothing more than the delusion of a man who had mistaken his prejudices for insight and his contempt for wisdom. That was the real lesson of American mobilization, the real meaning of those 8 million men. Not just that they existed, but what their existence meant about the world Hitler thought he understood and the future he thought he could control. He learned the truth, but he learned it too late to matter, too late to change course, too late to do anything but watch as the army he had dismissed crushed everything he had built. That was his answer to America's 8 million men. Not words, but silence. The silence of a man who had finally run out of delusions, out of excuses, out of time. The silence of absolute defeat.